Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. While the world watched the horrors of 9/11 play out on television, Dick McGraw is one of the thousands of people who saw it firsthand with his own eyes. Dick had agreed to come out of retirement in 2001 to become the press secretary for the U.S. Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. So he was in the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11 when at 9:37 a.m., terrorists flew American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the building. That explosion and fire killed nearly 200 people. In our conversation, Dick remembers the moments before, during, and right after the attack, and he also talks about the next 3 years of serving his country. What was it like for the family on 9/11? Because they knew you worked at the Pentagon, I imagine.
Hairy, very. Oh yes, of course, extremely hairy. When the alarm went, when the crash happened and everybody evacuated the building, everybody took their cell phones and tried to call home to let people know I'm okay. Well, the cells were jammed. The towers were slammed. Mm-hmm. So it was hours before I could get through to my wife. And she wasn't upset. She had been out shopping, was not even aware that there had been an accident until, not an accident, but an attack until several hours later. When she got home, I was able to get her. Mm-hmm. The boys were concerned. But when I got a hold of her, she was relieved. But she spent hours not even knowing whether there had been an attack. So,
How long did it take you to talk to the boys?
Oh, I didn't do that till I got home late that night. And then after that, the assistant secretary and I divided up the workforce, the workday. She took days and I took nights.
Yeah. We talked about this before, but for this audience who may have never heard it, the people who worked at the Pentagon never thought that it was going to be the scene of an attack. Never thought that if an attack was going to happen, that an attack would happen at the Pentagon, did they?
We never did. In fact, however, I must say that the day before the attack, Secretary Rumsfeld was having a breakfast with some leaders in Congress, and he was talking about we're not ever going to have another war like World War II. I mean, where an army pits against another army, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't know where the next attack is going to come from. We just don't know. And he described it as what he called asymmetric warfare. Well, that was the morning before. That was September 10th. The next morning, of course, we were hit, and everybody was surprised because our armed forces were prepared for an attack from outside the United States borders. Mm-hmm. Other than the occasional terrorist attack, like the bombing of the towers in New York City, the occasional one inside this country was very rare. No one anticipated something like this, and no one anticipated terrorists taking over U.S. airplanes and using them as bombs. I mean, people had hijacked U.S. airplanes to take them somewhere for ransom, but no one ever conceived the idea of taking an airplane and using it as a bomb to kill thousands of Americans.
Now, you were in the building, you were in the Pentagon, and you said you were actually in a meeting when it happened?
Just coming out of a meeting. I had been in a meeting in an office right beside Rumsfeld's office with two other guys, and we were talking about things, and everybody has TV sets on, and we were watching the news, and we saw one plane hit the first tower, and we thought, oh, what a dummy that is. And within 15 minutes, the second one hit, and we all knew right then that this is not an accident. This is a terrorist attack. So we broke the meeting up. And going downstairs to my office, I said to the guy that was with me, I said, we're next. I don't know why I felt that. I just knew that we were next. And so I'm in my office about 30 minutes later, and I heard what I thought was a sonic boom, mm-hmm. which, of course, is illegal over the nation's capital. So I knew it wasn't that, but that's what it sounded like. Felt a little bump, but my television didn't flicker, my computer didn't flicker, my phone didn't go off. I mean, everything worked just the same. But in a few minutes, we got the alarm to evacuate the building. So everybody went outside, and there was one wedge between where I was and where the airplane hit. When it got outside the building, you could look up over the building and see smoke. So we knew we had been hit, but we didn't know how bad it was, exactly where it was, how many people were hurt. We didn't know any of that. So we didn't know that until later in the day and the next day, as a matter of fact.
Was there any thought going in at that point in time that the Pentagon would not be able to survive an attack like that?
No, never occurred to us. Pentagon was built in 1940, 41, and 42. It was, 60 years old, had never been modified, except for one wedge. One wedge had been modified, and Kevlar had been put in different places in that wedge that had been brand new wedge. And it's strange where the airplane hit. The airplane hit between two wedges, and the wedge that had not been modified with Kevlar backing in the wall was wiped out. The wedge that had the Kevlar, almost untouched. It's amazing. So it was just in the process of doing the whole building after 60 years. It took us, a year to rebuild it, but we got it done.
You told me that going around the building you could see the smoke, but you didn't get a sense of what likely had happened until you got clear of the building and around the corner, correct?
That's right. The building, of course, is huge, and on one side of the building you could see smoke on the other side, but we didn't know what the damage was. And going around the building, we had to stay roughly 300 yards away from the building itself. If we had stayed in the building, I could have gone around and helped people on the other side, but everybody evacuated. And when I got around the building on the other side, you could see the airplane had hit the building, or something had hit the building. We didn't know what it was. It was a bomb or some kind had hit the building. But huge fire, smoke, a large part of the building missing. Fire engines, emergency personnel, everybody. I mean, you could see a lot of damage to the building.
Now, you have told me in the past that you went right into press secretary mode. You were getting approached by reporters all over the place. Was there ever any time that you sat back and said, I survived an attack, or I survived whatever happened here, or did that come several days later?
Well, it came that night. We organized a press briefing at 6 o'clock that night, right after the hit, in the building, in the press room. There was smoke still in the building, and you could still smell it. And after that broke up, and I went back to the office, and a number of people went home, and I stayed in the building all night. During the night, I had time to think, and I realized what had happened, because the building is still burning on the other side. Mm-hmm. Where I am, I mean, there's still smoke, but you could breathe okay. But yeah, you realize, I could have been hit, I'm lucky. Could have hit someplace else.
The magnitude then set in several hours later?
When we knew what had happened in New York and what had happened in Pennsylvania and this one, and there was a fourth one that could have been, we knew. I knew, and we all knew. We were very fortunate. But there are, on any given day, between 25 and 30,000 people in the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. It's a 6 million square foot office building. We were lucky that more people weren't hurt or killed.
What was that like then? Because you were in an information gathering mode yourself.
Definitely.
Right after it happened. So people are asking you for information that at that point in time you didn't have.
Did not.
Where did your phone calls go at that time?
Well, we still had a few people in the area. I mean, you could see what was happening.
Sure.
I couldn't get to the secretary. I couldn't get to leadership. I could get to some of my people who were on the ground closer to the action, and they could tell us that they're bringing bodies out. It was an airplane because we have a piece of a tail here, so we knew it was an airplane, and then we were able to find out which airline and which flight it was, and through the FAA and the airline itself how many people were on board. Mm-hmm. We knew that, but we didn't know until several days later how many of our own people in the building were killed. But we're scratching around trying to find information from wherever we could without starting rumors. It's critical that you get correct information. If you don't know, say you don't know.
And that, as a press secretary, that was your experience coming out.
Yes, definitely.
Trying to make sure you do that. In the days that followed, what were your main jobs then? Still trying to get that information out to reporters, or were you also trying to do some other things to help in the aftermath of inside the Pentagon?
Trying to do a lot of things, because as soon as it happened, the powers that be began to think about where did this come from, and what do we do about it? So on the one hand, we're thinking about a counterattack, but where should it go? I mean, and that came very quickly. And what should it be called? I mean, it should have a code name. I think it was Enduring Freedom. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So that was one piece. At the same time, it fell part of my lot to deal, from a public affairs standpoint, with the families of those who were injured and killed in the Pentagon. There was a place set up in Arlington for them, and that was a very important piece. The third was organizing our own public affairs shop to be able to handle warfare. We weren't organized to handle war, so we had to organize to do that. That meant restructuring our own department. That's why we were working 24 hours a day, literally 24 hours a day.
Talk to me a little bit about the dealing with the families. I can't imagine that would have been easy at all.
It was terrible.
Compared to what you were used to doing on a daily basis.
I won't say it was difficult. It was sad. Obviously, it was sad.
Sure.
I mean, we're dealing with mass death here, and an totally unanticipated terrorist attack, and people wanted to know what happened and how could this happen. A lot of grieving. We tried to take care of as many concerns as we could, and just be human. Just recognize that you need to be human and compassionate, and that's what it's all about. Just being compassionate.
And as you said, you were talking about Operation Enduring Freedom. Did you get a sense in the days ahead of time what was going to happen, or were you just told, as a press secretary would be told, the day it happens, you're going to start getting questions about this? How did you find out about when the attack was going to happen?
Fortunately, Secretary Rumsfeld and most of the leadership in that administration, the public affairs people were not left out in the cold. We were a part of the decision-making process.
Really?
Yes. So when the planning was taking place, we were involved in the planning of the taking place. In fact, as it was planned, I sent one of my people was an admiral, one-star admiral, to Afghanistan with deploying troops, because we didn't have any people in Afghanistan to handle the media, and the media could get to Afghanistan on their own. I mean, not very easily, but they could. We were involved in helping the media and reporting on the war as best we could from day one, even in the planning process. Plus, then we began to hold daily press briefings on what was happening in Afghanistan. It was well run, I think.
The media process, the reporters coming to you for questions, you giving answers. Safe to say, as I remember it, I don't remember it being as adversarial as the media reporters and the press briefings are in Washington, D.C. now.
Generally speaking, it was not adversarial. It is fair to say that the media always wants more answers than you can give.
Sure.
And sometimes that gets testy. Sometimes they think you're withholding information that the public has a right to know. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. In our case, it's a matter of what information do I have that I can give you that's not going to be detrimental to the troops in the field, or detrimental to national security. That's our only concern. And if we think it's going to be detrimental to troops that are about to make a movement in the field, we keep that. But we didn't do what Eisenhower did during World War II when he built an entire fake army for the Germans to see. I mean, that was lying to the press, because he let the press cover that.
Sure.
As if it were real.
Right.
We didn't do that.
You were in Vietnam, and there were reporters embedded then.
There were, absolutely.
But this was a different kind of embedded reporter that then began to cover Enduring Freedom following 9/11.
Well, not only that, John, 30 years had elapsed between Vietnam and Afghanistan. And in those 30 years, all the generals and all the officers that were involved in Vietnam and the media in Vietnam and embedding media in
Cronkite, Rather, and all those
guys. Yeah. Well, and all those guys embedded in Vietnam, all the people that were involved in allowing that to happen were gone. They weren't in the military anymore.
Right.
So when the idea came up of embedding media with troops, everybody said, "No, you can't do that. You're going to compromise. You're going to compromise the mission. You're going to put the civilians at risk." And it was left to those of us, and there weren't many of us, who were there 30 years ago, said, "We've already done this 30 years ago." Mm-hmm. Oh, didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So there were 4-star generals there when I was there the second time who weren't even in the service when I was there in 1970.
How hard was it to convince them that it would be better for the military as a whole to know more and to have that story of the military in action be told in that Operation Enduring Freedom?
It took the Secretary of Defense to convince them.
So the press secretary, they sent you back and said, "Bring me your boss."
Something like that.
And how hard was the argument? I mean, did it take a week? I mean,
Oh, no,
time
it
and
took,
time and time again?
it took over a month.
Really?
Yeah, it took over a month. They just didn't see the value of it. The media, I mean, the leadership, or the military leadership, just didn't see the value of it. Thought we're putting people at risk unnecessarily. We were conducting clandestine operations that we didn't want people involved in, especially the secret people. I mean, but we embedded people with them too.
And do you think it was the right decision?
To embed?
Yeah, to embed?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. On the one hand, yes.
Because that was warfare that this country had never seen
Exactly.
since Vietnam.
We didn't even see it in Vietnam. In Vietnam, the media were there. They took videotapes, which we sent to
Canisters of film that sent back, right?
We sent film and videotape to Japan, which got flown over to New York before it's fed to. So it's a day or two late anyway.
Right.
Now we're getting live feeds from the field while it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I've ever seen a war while it's happening in your living room.
Did you watch it as it was unfolding?
Of course. Who didn't? Yes.
As the press secretary, you were watching the same thing that the rest of America was watching.
Sure. I didn't see anything different. I mean, I had nothing else to see.
Yeah.
There was no classified film that I could see.
In, I guess it was November of 2001, the tape of Osama bin Laden came out.
Yes.
And that was, you used your ingenuity and kind of used your noggin, as my grandmother would say, to find a solution to what could have been a real big problem.
We were given a copy of a tape that had been confiscated of Osama bin Laden, and another government agency had a copy and wouldn't share it with us. So we had ours, and it was given to me we need a translation of this. And if you go through channels, it's going to take you weeks. I mean, we don't have weeks. So I went to the Yellow Pages and found 2 translators and sent it to both of them and said, "You guys collaborate on this, and I need it back by tomorrow."
And you wanted that because you wanted it released.
Sure. And once we got it, we compared the translation that we got with the other government agency that had it to make sure that it was consistent, make sure that we weren't being hoodwinked or something, and they were. So yeah, we let it out.
Was there a time during the whole process? I mean, you had known Mr. Rumsfeld for many years, and I want to go back to how you met years ago. But was there a time when you two butted heads about any of this, or did he trust you and your judgment to want to release that transcript of that tape, or were there other things that that you and he butted heads about in the months afterwards?
No, we never butted heads about anything other than Mom wanting to come home and he not wanting me to come home.
Right. That's after you answered that first phone call.
Yeah. Right. But no, we never butted heads about anything. He obviously had a lot of confidence in me because he gave me a job to do. It was due in 9 months, and it was a big job. And I never saw him in those 9 months. And
after the bin Laden tape, not long after that, you became you went into legislative affairs with the Department of Defense rather than public affairs. But he gave you another task, which was to build or to organize the memorial 1 year later, September 11, 2012 or 2002.
The task was to select the site and select the memorial for the 1 year anniversary. Select the site, plan the event, and secondly, select the design and the memorial and the architect for the memorial, which went up a year later. I did that while I was in legislative affairs, but it was good to involve the families. The president came over. I mean, it was the building had to be finished in a year, had to be done. Huge task. But boy, the construction crews that worked on that 24 hours a day, they were driven to get that done. They were driven to get it done.
Just like the news conference you told me you had on the night of September 11th, 2001.
Yeah.
You held it in the building to send a message. Holding the 1 year anniversary outside the building, also to send a message?
Yes, at the site where the airplane hit.
Right.
At the site. The message being clear, visually as well as orally. Yes, we were hit, but we're still here, back as usual, and we're coming to get you.
And did it take any? I know the crews worked. Any time during that process that you thought maybe it might not be ready?
No, never. I was monitored along with the engineers and the building people. No, everybody said, "Don't worry, we'll be ready," and they were. They were ready, absolutely.
You not long after that, you helped organize a NATO meeting again that Secretary Rumsfeld asked you to do. But that kind of took you out of the Pentagon, at least for a month or so at a time. Talk to me about inside the Pentagon and when things are going on. Are people thinking about the taxpayer outside? Are they thinking about the American in this country and doing the job for them, or are they just doing a job on a regular basis?
Some of both. I mean, you got, as I said, 25 to 30,000 people. The political appointees, and there are several hundred of those in the Pentagon, are probably the ones that I know and knew of anyway, were thinking I'm doing public service for the American people. That's why I'm here. I'm here because I want to be here. The career civil service people, some of those will and some of those will not. Some of those are just a career civil service job. Mm-hmm. The difference that I found, and I have worked in Treasury and I worked in HUD as well as DOD. I found more DOD people dedicated to what they were doing than I did in Treasury, IRS, and HUD. The DOD people know they're working for the national defense. They know they're doing an extremely important job for the safety of the country, which is not to say that people in Treasury and HUD aren't. Mm-hmm. But the people in DOD seem to know that they are and to take it very seriously. I can't say that every person that I met did that, but
sure.
That is clearly the thinking of most of the people.
Was there a difference in what you saw inside the hallways of that building beforehand and after 9/11?
Yes, oh, definitely.
I mean, security is aside, but just in the attitude of
absolutely, people. Absolutely. There, and I had a chance to, during my first year there to take a group of civilians around to several military bases in this country and expose them to what was happening. And wow, to see these 19-year-old Marines who stand up to you and look you in the eye and say, "I am proud to be serving my country." Mm-hmm. It really does get you.
Yeah,
it really does get you.
And especially people who aren't around them on a daily basis. I think you can see those young men and women when you go and cover them or when you, as a DOD person, go to these bases. But somebody who's, from, let's just say, Tennessee and gets there once in a lifetime, it's something they never forget.
Absolutely, it is.
After you did the NATO event, you were supposed to end what was originally going to be, a 9-month helping Mr. Rumsfeld that turned into 2 years, and then he asked you to go overseas?
When I got there, I said, okay, I'll stay for a year, and it wound up staying 4. But after the NATO thing, which was a 9-month in the planning process before it was executed, I was ready to pack my bags and go home, and ran into a fellow that had been Secretary Rumsfeld's Secretary of the Army during Rumsfeld's first tour as Secretary of Defense back in the early 70s, mid-70s. And he said, "Hey, I'm putting together a group to go to Afghanistan to be special advisors to the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. 6 people, and I'd like for you to be one of them."
Okay.
I said, "Well, I think I need to go home." No. You really need to do this. Mm-hmm. So I met the ambassador, and Secretary okayed it. My wife okayed it.
I heard she okayed it first before the Secretary.
That's true. She did. First things first.
Yeah, you got to go to the real boss before the work boss.
So I wound up going to Afghanistan for 7 months. I planned,
And that was part of the reconstruction effort over there.
It was called, yes, we were called the Afghanistan Reconstruction Group, and the task was to assess what was going on the rebuilding of Afghanistan, assess what USAID, part of the State Department, was doing with their funds, mm-hmm. And how can we make it better and more efficient, and are we doing what we should be doing? And get that back to the ambassador and he to the president and to the Secretary of Defense.
What you expected when you were going there and what you saw when you got there, big difference?
No, because I had no idea what to expect. So no, I had nothing to compare it to. It was different from Vietnam, vastly different from Vietnam. I lived in a half of a cargo container on the grounds of the embassy.
Like something we'd see at the port right down here, the big stacked containers about that size?
Half of that.
Yeah, half of that.
Half of that, yeah. Cut it in half so that you got, what I have, 140 square feet all to myself.
Oh, wow.
7 by 20.
Plush.
Yeah.
Wow.
7 by 20. And we all had the same thing. We all had it. Except the ambassador, he had two cargo containers back to back, so he had them side. He had a big place.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, it was different. The day we got there, we had a rocket attack on the embassy. Spent some time out in the field. Spent some time assessing what USAID was doing. In addition to that, the ambassador made me his public affairs officer for the embassy as well. And that didn't sit too well with the State Department because that's really their bailiwick. Their processes are a whole lot different. I mean, you've been in public affairs.
Sure.
State Department is wholly centralized. If you're in any embassy around the country, around the world, you cannot say anything publicly without going back to DO State to get it okayed. Mm-hmm. DOD is just the opposite. Totally decentralized, unless there's something specific that they send you that you tell you ahead of time. You can't talk about this till she comes.
Like the B-52 bomber.
No, that was a.
Oh, what was a different one?
Not the 52. That was a.
That you were told you could only say one line about.
This airplane flies higher, farther, faster than any airplane in the world. Can't think of the name of the airplane now. But anyway, that was foreign to me. So I'm stepping on my own feet by doing things that state didn't like me to do, but I'm doing what defense does. So that was different. I had not anticipated that.
Part of the effort, you were just trying to assist and help in any way you can.
Sure. But it was exciting to be involved in what was happening in Afghanistan and consulting with the president's press secretary. He had no public affairs, so I'm guiding him on how to do his job, and hired someone to help him do that. And all of the other military forces there, who all had their own, NATO forces and U.S. forces had their own public affairs people who were doing whatever they normally do. They're looking for some guidance from the ambassadors, which was mine to give. So we had a regular rump session, every week or so with all of those people, which was good. Coordination, what was being said. Growing
up in West Virginia, when you did, going to high school, what you wanted to do back then, what your life was like in small town West Virginia, would you have ever thought you'd be in Afghanistan trying to help reconstruct an entire nation after the battle?
Afghana what?
I'm sorry.
I didn't know there was in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I didn't know there was any,
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Fayette County, West Virginia. I didn't know there was anything outside the county almost. No, I never dreamed of anything like it. Just never did. So I've been extremely fortunate and lucky to be where I have been and to see the things that I've seen and do the things that I've done. I've been very fortunate.
What did you want to do as a young man growing up in West Virginia?
First, I thought I wanted to go to work in the same steel plant that my dad worked in, but I couldn't get a job. There were no openings. So I went to go to school. My dad said, well, if you go to school, you ought to be a lawyer or a journalist. I'm not sure where the connection is.
Well, at least we made the top two anyway. Usually in that thing it's doctor or lawyer or something like that. But journalist top two, you're a good man for a father there.
Yeah, right. So I wound up with degrees in journalism and communications.
And when you went to school, did you want to do the TV journalism, newspaper journalism, or because you gravitated more toward public relations as you got later on? The newspaper, is that what you wanted to do?
That's what I thought I wanted to do as a journalist. I mean, that was what I knew. Most of TV was still new in the 50s. It was still black and white mostly.
Yeah.
Newspapers I knew, and the journalism training at that point was mostly written. There was not much in the way of TV journalism.
Yeah.
There was a little bit when I got to the Edward R. Murrow School of Journalism in Washington State University. We did have a TV curriculum there, and I did some directing. I did some TV work there, but my bachelor's degree was in just journalism. The master's degree is in communication, which includes the whole gamut.
And you enlisted in the Air Force and did some of the media relations then in the Air Force, right?
I did. Well, yes. When I first enlisted in the Air Force, I was photographic equipment repairman, which is we're fixing airborne cameras for recon outfits. But when I got my commission, the Air Force sent me to graduate school. Then they sent me to Vietnam to practice my public affairs skills.
But they didn't call it that, did they?
No, it's different now.
And what was Vietnam like for somebody who wanted to do media relations? Because if you talk to people outside, there was a different story outside being told than what was actually happening over there on the ground.
Confusing is what I would have to say it was. It was confusing for all of us. Because the signals we were getting from Washington, from the Department of Defense, even from the president, were confusing to the media, confusing to us. You had the White House calling targets, specific targets for the bombers. Our job was just, for this half of the time that I was there, for 6 months, I was dealing with the media downtown, press briefings downtown, in downtown Saigon. And the other half, I was publishing an internal newspaper for 7th Air Force News. I liked that part because I didn't have to deal with the media and I didn't have to answer their questions. It was all in-house. But I learned more when I was doing stuff out. Mm-hmm. It was more interesting. But it was difficult handling their requests because everybody wanted their tape shipped off immediately. Mm-hmm. You could make phone calls, but it was difficult to even make phone calls.
And what did that teach you then as you came out and you went, I guess, into the IRS?
Not from then. I came from Vietnam. I came back to the Pentagon. I spent 2 years in the Pentagon.
Okay, all right.
And in the Office of Secretary of the Air Force, Public Affairs.
Okay.
And that was where I learned most of my real public affairs management stuff. I mean, you deal with media in a way that in the Pentagon that you don't anywhere else. I mean, when you get a query from them, you don't leave till it's answered. I don't care if it takes you all night. You do it. I mean, that's your job. They're nicer, better people. They may be more inquisitive. They may be more pressing, but they're more professional than the guys in the field for the most part. Well,
those guys, they're not having things shot at them, and they're not, laying in foxholes as they try to, file their stories either.
Right.
So it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, and when I was there, Martha Raddatz, Martha Raddatz?
Sure, yes.
She was working for ABC at the time. Mm-hmm. I think she's something else now. John McWethy was...
Sure, he was ABC, yeah.
He got killed right after he retired. Yeah. One of my favorites. Barbara Starr started with John McWethy at ABC and then moved to CNN.
CNN, yeah.
She's one of my favorites. And, of course, Jim Miklashevsky was NBC all the time, and we got along with him very well. Yeah,
you spoke highly of him as one you really respected.
Yes, very much so. Jim knew what he was doing, and still does, but he's not working anymore. But we played golf together.
What makes a good reporter that you can respect? Somebody that you had to deal with, obviously, that you had to deal with but didn't respect, versus somebody like a Miklashevsky who you did.
One that respects me, as I respect him. One that knows that I'm not trying to pull his leg, that I'm not trying to hide something on him, that I'm telling him everything that I can tell him. And you can ask anybody you want, you're not going to get anything more. I'm giving you everything I can. In fact, I've probably given you more than you're going to get anywhere else. It's respect, mutual respect. That's what makes the difference.
At that time, though, in Vietnam and the 70s, did you understand where maybe some reporters may not have trusted some people in government?
Of course, especially in Vietnam.
Sure.
I mean, my heavens, body count was one thing. I mean, I don't know, I never saw it, but I'm led to believe that body counts were made up from time to time because we had to have more bodies than they did.
So that made it tough.
Winning.
That made it tougher on you then.
I didn't do body count.
Right, but it still had to make it as a press secretary. That had to make it more difficult on you.
Absolutely. But the body count thing carried with me long after I left there. I went to Eastern Airlines as a senior vice president for public affairs in 1983. Mm-hmm. And the headline in the Miami Herald when I got there, placed by the labor unions, was Body Count McGraw.
Really?
Yes. This is 10 years after the Vietnam War, because I was in public affairs in Vietnam. There it was, Body Count McGraw.
How did you overcome that?
With some difficulty.
I can only imagine when you walk in and they've already given you a nickname.
Oh yeah, and not a very pleasant one either.
No. How do you go about that? You just go about doing your job?
You have to ignore it. Yeah. You have to build your own trust the way you do it. I mean, I can only tell you the truth, I can only give you what I have.
Right.
And I promise you, that's what I will always do.
And when did you meet Don Rumsfeld for the first time?
Met Don Rumsfeld for the first time. It would be 1979. G.D. Searle, and he was CEO of G.D. Searle. He had been Secretary of Defense before. We were in line in the cafeteria together.
Really?
As a matter of fact. And I was complimenting him on his trousers. He said, "These belong to my dad. I still wear them."
Hi, sir. How are you?
Yes, yeah,
nice trousers.
Yeah, I mean, something like that. So we got to know each other, and it was mutual respect.
You said you used to be able to sit down and have long conversations with the man?
I did on more than one occasion. When I was offered the job at Eastern Airlines and Rumsfeld was on that board, I sat down with him and said, I need your thoughts on what I should do. And he put his feet upon the desk and smoking his pipe, and we chatted for about a half an hour about goods and bads and do's and don't do's. And finally he said, "It's up to you, man. I can't tell you what to do."
But didn't you at Searle help in one of the major campaigns that they had as well, though?
I did, a couple of things.
And that really kind of, I imagine, that earned Rumsfeld's trust.
It solidified my relationship with him. I did two things. They were related. I oversaw the public relations and public affairs part of introducing Equal, which is one of the most successful food introductions in this economy until that point in time. And then not long after that was the Tylenol scare, where someone was tampered with Tylenol.
Sure.
Well, we had a copycat incident with Equal, and I handled that at Rumsfeld's request because his PR guy was out of town. This is the senior VP for public affairs at Searle was out of town, and he asked me to handle that, which I did successfully. And ever since then, I mean, we were, yeah.
And so that I would imagine that brought the two of you closer together, so that when he becomes a defense secretary for a second time, he wants somebody he can call in that job.
Well, there's more there. There was other occasions too. We went to after we launched Equal, one of the products was aspartic acid and phenylalanine. We went to Japan to buy a company that makes this compound, and I went with him. And so we're running around Japan, trying to meeting people, and he had just had rotator cuff surgery.
Okay.
And he needed some therapy, and he called me down in his room and said, "Dick, can you come down and help me with my PT?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Joyce doesn't like to do this because she's afraid it's going to hurt me." I said, "No." Okay. It was on his right arm. I remember that. His arm was in a sling. He said, I said, "What do you need me to do?" He said, "You need to hold my arm, hold my elbow, take my wrist, raise my arm up to here, then rotate my arm like this."
Okay.
I said, "Okay." I said, "Is it going to hurt?" He said, "It might." So I began doing this. He began to come up out of the chair.
Uh-oh.
"Oh, you!" And he went,
blankety blank.
Yes, thank you very much. Does it hurt? Does it hurt, Don?
Yeah.
So since then, I've had rotator cuff surgery. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You want me to come and do your PT for you?" "No, it's okay. I got it.
You might remember that. You might remember that trip overseas.
Right.
You went then you went to ComSat.
Yeah.
Before you retired to Wilmington. You retired here in 1991. What brought you to Wilmington, and why retire here?
Well, what brought me to Wilmington was that when we retired, we looked at places around the country. We had lived in Miami with Eastern, loved Miami. The problem was that when you're in Miami, if you're driving out of Miami, it takes you a day to get to the border, Georgia border. You're still in Florida.
Yeah.
If you're driving.
Yeah.
At the airline, I didn't have that problem because I flew everywhere. Mm-hmm. We used to have a place at Kiva Island near Charleston, so we looked at that. I wanted to go to Arizona, and my wife said, "I'm not living anywhere where the state tree is a damn cactus." So that was out. We looked at Chapel Hill, looked at Raleigh, Durham, and I had a friend at Eastern who was the senior HR guy there, who had a house down here on 3rd and Nunn. And we visited him, and he showed us around the town, and just really loved the town. Just loved the town. So we just said, this is the best we've seen. We really like it here.
And so you're here. You come here in '91. You volunteer. You serve on some boards and everything else like that. And then I don't know if you want to say made the mistake, but you sent a congratulatory note to Mr. Rumsfeld after he's sworn in, and that led to what? You got a phone call.
I got an email from, I sent Don an email and said, I'm not looking for work. I'm happy. My golf handicap is down to 3. I'm having a good time. But if you need help for a year, I mean, I'll be happy to come up and lend a hand. I don't need anything. So I got an email from his office, and I thought he had sent it, but I don't think he sent it. I think he's had one of his people send it. And it was very short. It said, just get your butt up here. That's all it said. Don. It said, signed Don. So I did. I went up and talked to the people and talked to him, and I said, okay, I'll come up, and they identified what they wanted me to do.
It was supposed to be a year.
Supposed to be a year. I said, I'll do it for a year. And at the end of a year, I was ready to go home, and that's when I told you the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs had an opening. His principal deputy had left, and he had some organizational issues he wanted me to fix, which I did. And then I was ready to go home again, and just stayed on wound up being 4 years.
And after Afghanistan, you're over there for, I guess, about 7 months you were over there?
7 months, yeah.
And you come back, and then you're tapped to kind of help deal with the fallout of Abu Ghraib.
Well, I came back for that reason. I'm still in Afghanistan, not ready to come back until next month. And Rumsfeld sent a message, DOD message to the ambassador and said, can you send McGraw back next week? I need him to work on this Abu Ghraib issue with me. So I came back probably a month earlier than planned. And it was a task. I mean, we never did get the story right. I mean, we had the story right, but we were behind the 8 ball, behind the power curve, and getting a story out there. And once it's gone, once you've missed the first cycle, the news cycle, it's very, very tough to go back and make it up. You just can't do it.
Okay, for those who don't know, power cycle, first curve, explain what you mean by that to those who may not know about staying ahead of the story.
Once the news is out there, and if it's whether it's right or wrong, it's the first impression. And that's what sticks. Now, if what's out there is wrong and needs to be corrected, it's very difficult for anybody to accept, well, these are facts that change what you first saw. No. Now you're trying to make up something to soften what's out here already. Mm-hmm. No, I'm really not. I'm just trying to give you the facts, but that's very hard to get across, and it's virtually impossible to get it across.
You're trying to correct an impression that is already ingrained in somebody's mind, but you not just a day or two behind, you were a week or so behind by the time you came back here.
Right. If you do it within the first 24 hours, you got a chance. But a week behind, very difficult.
Did anybody ever learn that lesson dealing with Abu Ghraib? I mean, you came back and helped.
I don't think so.
But those who did wrong at the beginning, did they ever learn the lesson? That of what they were a mistake? What the mistake they made?
Oh, you mean public affairs wise?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The problem was the story broke in Afghanistan
about the mistreatment of the prisoners and
but it broke because one of our own public affairs people broke the story that there had been some mistreatment of prisoners, and I've forgotten the network that first got it. And the way they treated it was as treachery, as torture, as misbehaving, and it was they assumed it was DOD policy or administration policy to do that, and it was not administration policy. There was a half a dozen people and their supervisors who condoned it, who did it and condoned it. And they were subsequently punished because it was not policy. But the punishment part gets a little recognition after the fact. I mean, the damage was done. People did bad things.
Right.
And that was the news. The fact that you corrected it is not nearly as newsworthy.
No, and you're behind, so you're chasing impressions rather than chasing facts.
Right.
At that same time, around the 2003 timeframe, I think it may have been around that time, Mr. Powell, Secretary Powell, goes in front and tries to make the case about the invasion overseas of Iraq. As a fellow PR person, as you're watching that happen, what were your thoughts? Did you think that he had the right information? Did you know he had the wrong information? What was going through your mind?
I thought, as he did, that he had the right information. I mean, we all thought that he had the right. Nobody thought that Secretary Powell did not have the correct information. unless it was even those who gave it to him, I think, thought it was the right information. I think it was a misinterpretation of the data, turned out to be wrong. Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody intentionally gave Secretary Powell the wrong information in order to justify an invasion of Iraq. I just in my heart don't believe that that would be the case, although I wouldn't put it past some people. I just don't think it was. He is not.
Dick McGraw's opinion, right?
I do not believe Secretary Rumsfeld. I know he would not condone it. I know he would not condone it. I know the man well enough. There's no more ethical person alive than Don Rumsfeld, believe me.
The criticism that came afterwards, though, when you're in that kind of a position, Defense Secretary, Secretary of State, can you worry about the criticism? Can you worry about my reputation and how I'm going to go down in history? Because Secretary Powell now calls it, a mark on his reputation of what happened.
Sure you do, because it's your credibility.
Right.
And if you want to do anything ever in life, you're only as good as your credibility. So his credibility was tarnished for nothing of his fault, other than perhaps to say, I'm also a retired general, and I need to see the data. I need to see that this is as you say it is. But if you're Secretary of State, you have to rely, you can't do everything yourself. You have to rely on knowledgeable people. In this case, it was, my understanding was NSA, CIA, whoever they relied on for that data to be analyzed correctly. I think they all believed they had the right information. I don't think it was intentional. Nonetheless, the damage was done.
When did you finally say it's time for me to go home?
After the last session of the base realignment, and what's BRAC stand for? Base realignment and construction, maybe. In 2005, when that was done, and I don't have another task, and so I just go in to see Secretary, and I said, I'm done. I've done everything you've asked me to do. I'm like a utility infielder. He said, no, you're not a utility infielder. But I said, I've been your special assistant. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been assistant secretary in 2 different tasks, or deputy assistant secretary, different tasks. There's no crying need or demand. You don't have a task for me to do.
Sure.
I'm not just going to sit around and waste taxpayers' dollars twiddling my thumb waiting for you to find something. And plus, it's not your job to find something for me to do. I understand that. So I'm going to go home.
The first day you were home after all that, what was that like when you put that 4 years behind you? Looking for something to do, you have to go out and cut the grass? Or did your wife make you go to the store 5 or 6 times that day to get you out of the house?
No. I had been on the hospital board and the hospital foundation board before I left, and I sought to get back in the game. I'm the kind of person that just can't twiddly thumbs. In fact, one of the reasons I sent Rumsfeld the note the first time was I was bored of playing golf.
Wow, I hope I get that way at some point in time in my life. Can you watch a news conference, whether it be Pentagon, White House, state, anything like that? Can you watch a news conference now just to gain facts, or do you watch it and go, ooh, I wouldn't have responded that way?
I don't think it's a good source of facts. I don't think any of those press briefings, I should say this, I know the State Department the White House press briefings are not a good source of facts. They're not. All the facts are known before they go into the briefing. They're looking for follow-up on the facts that they have, and they're not going to get any. Mm-hmm. It's a game. I go to DoD's website for good information, correct information. They put out a lot of press releases. I don't watch DoD's press briefings. They are what I have found to be. They were, when I was there, a good source of facts, because you don't know what's going to be asked and you prepare for it. But they are a good source of. Once in a while, we had something we were prepared to announce at those press briefings, and once in a while the White House does as well, but not very often.
Not very often.
They're not a good source of facts.
Right. Are you thankful that you were not there in the advent of social media and as many outfits as there are now?
No, I don't think I'm thankful. I think it would have been a far, far different job, and I would not have had the training for it. PR people now and communications people now are schooled in that, and we weren't schooled in social media. So it would have been a difficult learning task, but yes, it could have been done. I'm not glad particularly that we didn't have social media. Heck, it was bad enough just with telephones.
It would have been more challenging, though.
Definitely would have been more challenging. With telephones with movie cameras in them, yes, much more challenging.
Much more. When you became a mentor over at UNCW, communications specialist, a specialist in communications, what did you try to teach the young men and women that you worked with in that program?
As a mentor, not as a teacher in the communications department, but as a mentor, I didn't talk about communications as much as I did behavior and attitude and perception of self-worth, how to carry yourself, how to ask questions, and above all else, whatever you can be anything you want to be, and whatever you do, I don't care what it is, just make sure you do it better than anybody else. And if you do that, if you're better than anybody else at what you do, you will be noticed and you will move up. You will move up.
And why did you teach that? Why was that the one message you wanted to get across? Is it a generational thing? Is it today's society thing? Or just Dick McGraw's, the way you were raised, the way you carried yourself, and to the extent that your life has been in service to country, but also service to community, and a good family man. I would think a lot of that came from inside Dick McGraw as much as you've seen over your many, many years.
I think so. I don't think that's something that you're taught. I think you can learn it for sure, but I don't think it's something that it's not in any curriculum that I have ever seen. I learned it from my mentor. I had a guru for several years that I met him in Vietnam, and he just died 5 years ago. And I mean,
who was that?
This fellow's name was Bill Greener. I give you the kind of guy he was. He talked me into retiring from the Air Force and going to work for the Internal Revenue Service. He was Assistant Secretary of Treasury at that point, having retired from the Air Force himself. For public affairs, he needed a regional public affairs guy in Philadelphia to handle the Philadelphia region.
Sure.
So he was going to be in on the interview process along with my immediate supervisor, who would have been the director of administration, as well as the regional commissioner. And going up on the train on the Amtrak, he said, "Okay, here are the questions you're going to get in the interview."
Uh-huh.
Gee, Bill, this is great. So I'm reading the questions. Put that down. Now pay attention. Here are the answers. Here's what I'm going to ask you, is what they're going to ask you, and here are the answers that you're going to give. That's a mentor.
Yeah.
That's somebody that when you go to an interview, if you have that kind of knowledge,
you can't lose. So,
right. Now, I've never been able to do that with anybody, unfortunately, but it taught me the value of being prepared, of knowing, of being aggressive, of knowing what you want to do and going for it, of just being better than anybody else at what you do. I mean, that's.
My dad always, and one of the things that I think I got from my father was work hard enough and so hard that when you're not there, they notice. Mm-hmm. Because if they notice that you're not there, they're going to have confidence when you are. And it seems to me like that's the way you lived your life as well.
Seems that way. I mean, people say you need to plan your life. I never did. I mean, it turned out that I lived my life in roughly 5-year chapters. But it was by accident. I never planned 5-year chapters. It just turned out that way. Moving from one thing to another, another job to another responsibility to another. But you're right. It's what's inside you. I mean, it's something that tells you, this is what I need to do. This is how you need to behave, and you just need to do it better than anybody else.
When's the last time Dick McGraw sat back, cup of coffee, beer, riding on a golf cart going down the fairway, when you just kind of sat back and said, man, the life I've led?
Oh, I do that often. My wife and I do that together often because we feel so blessed and so fortunate that we're in awe of everything. As I say, we've been very blessed and very fortunate to be where we are, how we are, as healthy as we are. Very fortunate.
Having survived the worst attack ever on the United States.
Yes, having served in Afghanistan and Vietnam together and not injured in any way. Yes, very fortunate. Well,
we're all fortunate that you took a couple of hours of your time and sat down here today and shared some of your thoughts. Wilmington is better because you're here, Dick McGraw. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure is mine. Thank you, John.
Thanks to Dick McGraw for coming in for this week's podcast. Dick is retired again in Wilmington, and he's serving as a member of the New Hanover Regional Medical Center Board of Trustees, and he helps out volunteering with other organizations in town as well. Next week, we talk with Johnson Britt, the district attorney who prosecuted the two men accused of killing Michael Jordan's father 25 years ago.
What we were asked to do, the Jordan family really tried to build a wall. They didn't want the media attention. They didn't want it to become a media circus. So Michael's lawyers in Chicago became our contacts.
Okay.
So anytime anything was about to unfold, I was on the phone with one of the lawyers in Chicago who had immediate access to Michael, and it was going to Michael. Mrs. Jordan, I've never spoken to her.
That's Johnson Britt, next week, right here on the podcast. Hey, if you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode, send me an email and let me know about it. Send it to jevans@wect.com. And if you'd be kind enough to leave me a rating or a review for this week's podcast, and you send me a screenshot of that review by email, well, you can be the lucky listener we pull out at random, and we'll send you that WECT travel mug. I'm John Evans. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of One on One.